Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, joined once again by David Anderson on this Wednesday, early signing period, first day, big day for Rutgers football and around college football. I wanted to break it all down. Rutgers now announcing 23 signees for the 2024 class, and wanted to really kind of analyze what they're getting, what it means for the future of the program, what needs they've addressed, and how they've done that. So no one better in my mind than having David back on. David, thanks so much for being here.
Appreciate it as always.
So just in terms of this class, what are some kind of big picture takeaways you have as we get into the kind of nuts and bolts of it?
Well, first of all, like we talk about all the time, which is more of a theme throughout past Rutgers years, where this was kind of our best day of the year that we were looking forward to since September, oftentimes, is just that you avoided catastrophe. You avoided major flips. You really only had one decommit in this entire class, which was a while ago, and Pruitt, who is going to BC, the lineman. Beyond that, it's really, did you do enough to at least tread water with the possibility of raising the ceiling of the program? And my answer to that would be absolutely yes. This is either the best or second best class since of Schiano 2.0. I think that other one was a little more top heavy from 2 years ago with Sam Brown and
Moses Walker.
But then now, Anthony Johnson no longer with the program. There's Amarian Brown didn't end up coming here. Wimsatt ended up in a different class, sort of. So, like, in terms of rankings, I'm not sure which one's going to end up being hired. Probably depends on how you look. But really, you at least are treading water in the Power 5. I'm going to call it the Power 5 today, though if we want to start calling it the Power 4 in the future sections, we can. And then last but not least is, like, keep in mind that almost all of these guys were committed before this season. So they were being recruited on off a 4-8 year, not the 6-6 bowl trip. So really what you're going to see is an improvement in the class for next year, because a lot of those guys are going to be recruited after what they saw in the field this past season.
Yeah, great point. And I think that also plays into the fact of the roster retention that we're seeing. It all meshes together, right? But I think now they have serious momentum going into the 25 cycle based on this, keeping the 24 class together, making progress on the field, bringing the band back together for next year. It's all good synergy leading up to 2025, where I think expectations could be raised, should be raised. I know, rankings aren't everything right now. The class is ranked 36th nationally in the 24/7 sports composite rankings, which encompasses several recruiting services. And then also within the Big Ten, the new Big Ten with 18 teams, this class ranks 11th. I think it's kind of where it's the floor of probably where you hope to be moving forward, but definitely progress too. So I think it's almost symbolic of this past season where there's significant progress, but also you don't really want to be below this moving forward and keep building on this. But I agree. And I think overall as a class, I think it's pretty deep in terms of how much impact they can get moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you want, like you said, is, probably somewhere between 35, 45, even if you're in the low 40s. This is something that I think I mentioned maybe even at our last stop. But when you look at the composite talent by some metrics, the gap between, like, the top 8 teams in the country is as big as the gap between, like, number 9 or 10 and, like, 50. So as long as you're kind of in that range, there's not really that much difference between, and we'll talk about this a lot during the bowl preview podcast with the Miami Hurricanes, is there's not as much of a difference between Rutgers and, like, top tier teams in, let's say, the ACC or other conferences. There's not as big a difference between that as there is between the top teams in the country that are in kind of the, competition for the national championship and literally everybody else. There's kind of like this huge space in between the two. So as long as you can kind of stay firm and stay solid, that's fine. The other thing to keep in mind is that because those big programs are taking less players, there's been a slight adjustment to the metrics that really rewards you now in recruiting and by some of the services for having like 4 and 5-star guys. They matter more than ever. And part of that is because the big schools are taking less and they want to make sure that it's accurately reflected, like how much of an impact they can have. And part of that is the impact of the transfer portal. And we'll talk a little bit about that because I'm not even exactly sure what to make of that. Every team is kind of handling it in a slightly different way. But it is true that if you look at, the number of guys that are, let's say, 86 and above in the 247 composite or 5.6 and above in rivals, Rutgers has more of them now than they ever had before, which is why you have to really look at it in terms of where they are ranked as a team. And even then, like, it's not an exact science. I'm just saying, like, those two kind of factors, you have to keep that in mind and not freak out if one site has them at 50 because another site might have them in the low 30s. But because of the number of guys, perhaps they just have more lottery tickets. And to go back to your original question, I feel like this class has a lot of lottery tickets in it, a lot more than usual. And we'll get into a little bit of that in a second. But any more comments before I talked a little bit about like why I feel that way?
No, I think tying to your point, I was literally just refreshing in terms of player grades, and this class is right at an 87 average, which is one of the higher classes Rutgers has had over the last decade plus. That class 2 years ago was 87.20, but it was very top heavy, like you were talking about. And it's kind of interesting in terms of that class. I mean, a lot of guys that were on the top end of that scale have not made an impact yet. So, and there's other guys farther down, that have in terms of obviously Sam Brown his freshman year, he was only a 3-star guy, but hasn't been a lot of output yet from that class. Where this class, I think you're right. There's guys that I think are lottery tickets in the sense of they can also find a role quicker as the talent is being upgraded. Especially after this coming season with so many returners coming. 2025, I feel like that roster is going to be wide open in terms of opportunity. And so you're really curious to see how many guys in this current class are going to be able to step into roles at that time.
Exactly. And that's where kind of I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of premium positions. I remember we had one of the most viewed debated articles we had when we were On the Banks was an article one signing day, maybe it was like a week before, and I was proposing, okay, what positions did I think Rutgers needed the most help? And basically, it came back that the listeners and the viewers, more so the readers we had at the time, were just more adamant that like you need edge rushers, you need cornerbacks, you need these like more impact players. And I think that's where this idea that you can get linebackers, tight ends type of guys out of the portal, maybe safeties, like we saw how Flip Dixon emerged this year, that's possible. So really you need to focus your efforts on like linemen, especially
Yep.
offensive and interior defensive linemen, and then just adding speed to your team. And that's really where, I think this class, they added a lot of volume. I mean, when we talk about just kind of the speed guys, I think that there's really 3 guys that I look at that are fast, will be fast, and that's Benjamin Black, Antonio White, and Kevin Levy. Kevin, right? I think it is. Yeah, Kevin Levy. And so those 3 guys, like I feel they'll definitely bring that speed to this level. When I look at the other ones who might be in that group, like Dakari Gilly or Crumpler or Guerriere, the running back, I'm not 100% sure what's going to end up happening with them. I think Gilly is a really good player. I think he explodes off the edge. He might even be more of a coverage linebacker at Rutgers. So that's something that'll be interesting to watch. Crumpler is an interesting one because he doesn't look that fast on film, but then when you think about it, it's like I guess it's his brother or half brother, Algie, was a tight end. He didn't look that fast either, but I mean, if those
He made
are
plays. He made plays.
he made plays, and including that play in the playoffs against the Jets that some of our viewers might remember, where he took down David Harris from behind after like a 30-yard head start. So like maybe he just is faster than he looks on film. Guerriere is similar, or Guerriere. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but it would be Guerriere if it was French. Right?
Ed Guerrier, yeah, from Florida,
Yeah.
the running back.
He has like this burst, but he's kind of stockily built. I mean, I think he's bigger than Monangai at his age,
Doesn't he
but
remind you a little bit of Monangai though?
mm, I'm not sure. I think he reminds me more of like a Joe Martinick. His pad
Okay.
levels, he's not as big in the upper body,
Right, he
but
is
like
lower. You're right.
he just takes the ball up the middle and just like it doesn't seem like they can get him. It's kind of odd. Like he doesn't look like he's running that fast, but maybe it's just the explosion or the timing. Like I think that it'll be really interesting to me from that group between Gilly, Crumpler, and Guerrier. Like what can those guys do in the weight room? Because
Mhm.
if they have adequate speed, if like those are the type of guys that the Rutgers strength and conditioning staff has done wonders with in their 2 stints here. So I'm hopeful there, but the biggest risk I would say in this class would possibly be that they didn't add enough speed. But you can say that every year. Any thoughts about those? I mean, guys kind of ranging from receiver, running back, defensive backs. Any other thoughts on this group?
Well, I think in terms of your point about speed, I think they were honing in on certain needs because I think like wide receiver, right? They have so many freshmen from last year's class and definitely some speed in that class where, I think that they didn't prioritize. I mean, they got Benjamin Black, who I think is, a big, big pickup. We know NC State was really trying to get him at the end. And that was something I even heard like all fall that was a risk. And I think the fact that they signed him is huge. And a guy that shows that is the type of speed they need, but they didn't, try to get 3, 4, 5 receivers with speed because they already have a lot that they're developing right now that I think have potential. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's an interesting class too, just in terms of the geography of it. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think that there's guys that kind of fell in their lap a little bit, like Sam Piloff, I think is a linebacker. I think he
Yeah.
has good speed for a linebacker. He's someone that, if he can get bigger and I think he's fundamentally sound. I think that's a guy. He reminds me of an old school Shiano linebacker from the first tenure of what he could do. But just in terms of that top line talent too. I mean, Cash Sanders, getting him is a coup in many ways, just because of the Big North, but also what he brings to the table. I think that he's probably. I don't know if you agree. I think he's the best athlete in the class. I'm not sure, but I think that he offers that type of dynamic playmaking ability that they desperately need, regardless of what position he ends up playing.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the best athlete, it's got to be Duff or Sanders right now. That's not to
Yeah,
say they will be in 4 years, but right now, I mean, there's a reason that Kyle Sanders is a top 5 player in New Jersey and a 4 star. He's just the best player on the field with the ball, without the ball, coverage, closing ground on people. Like he's a type of guy where he's going to be playing on special teams right away. Is
yeah,
it 1 unit, 2 units? I don't know. But and the other key thing here is that, yeah, you don't need to get all New Jersey guys. But the fact that they got a guy of his caliber out of the state of New Jersey, you're going to have to keep doing that until, more guys from New Jersey want to come to Rutgers again. We saw this happen before. We saw this happen in the Graber years. We saw this happen in the Shiano 1.0. Like this isn't the first time that local guys are kind of like, let's see you prove it. And so the fact that you got Sanders, I mean, I think unlike many other guys on this group, I'm pretty sure I know what position he's going to play, which is safety. Like pretty
mhm,
much right away. Like that's really the best position for him. And with this staff's track record, I mean, really, you might not need him next year, but you're going to need players in 2 years. And if he can be part of that starting unit in 2025, that's going to be a huge boost. But if he plays well enough, there's an avenue for him to get playing time on special teams or even on defense as a true freshman. Like he's probably that good. And so, like we talked about with a lot of these guys, I don't think any of them are going to have to play next year, except for maybe Duff. But everybody else, if they can play, great. This is the whole raising the ceiling thing because Rutgers is maintaining that level right there. And last comment on Piloff, I guess he just really smooth. He just looks like a really good player. The best way to describe him is he's good. Like,
yeah,
and that might sound boring, but he just is basically good at football in every way. The question that for him, as well as the 2 other linebackers they brought in, Johnson and Robinson, is are any or all of them going to be able to cover well enough? Because
Mhm.
if the answer is no, then you can still play one of them. Like you see, even NFL teams, they can have a linebacker who's not a great in coverage, but you're going to have to offset that by having other linebackers who are really good in coverage and good defensive backs behind them. And so I think Pilov is a good athlete. Johnson, Robinson, I think between them, I think at least one or two of them are going to be good starters, and I mean good starters. I don't know which of the which because it always depends on how they develop. But there's 3 lottery tickets for a guy that could be, a top 4 or 5 round draft pick in the NFL in terms of like where their ceiling is. But of course, odds would say only one of them will even become a starter, and only one of them will like probably reach the league. But I mean, there are 3 good chances there that I think we haven't seen from Rutgers in the past. Since that class, like you mentioned, with Fatukasi, Fogg, and I think there was 2 other linebackers in that class. So I'm very bullish on this linebacker group, especially because if these big time programs aren't going to take linebackers, take them. Right? If Ohio State is only going to bring in 1 or 2 linebackers, fine, you bring them in. Like there's an opportunity where other teams are zigging that you can zag. Any other thoughts on Johnson or Robinson, who are both, also possibly going to end up at edge rushers because of their size?
Yeah, I think that it's certainly. I think the quality of athlete that they're bringing in is an upgrade overall, and I think that there's some versatility there too in terms of how they built the class. They got a lot of defensive linemen, but I think that I really like Robinson. I think that his size and his speed, and coming from Florida, I mean, he was still it's funny, like in that state, he's almost like an afterthought. But he'd probably be a top 10 player in New Jersey in this class. So
Oh yeah.
I really like the way he plays on film, and I think that they're getting a little bit more. It's gonna be curious. Like we've saw teases of it, right? When Toure was able to move around, like how are they? How does that evolve past the Toure era? Is that something that they want to continue to do? And is that maybe a guy like Robinson can slide into that slot, and then peel off as more of a traditional, one of those 2 linebackers? I just think it's going to be interesting to see how Harris Simiak's defense evolves, after 2024 with this new wave of talent, and how they kind of mix and match with who they're getting. But I wanted to shift now to kind of the linemen, especially offensive. I really like. I'm really high on Carter Kadow. I wanted to get your thoughts on him and just overall how you think they did. Whether it's just offensive line or both sides of the line.
Yeah, I mean with Kadow, it's interesting. I was watching some of his basketball film too. He has very good awareness, which
Hmm.
sounds like you're just saying like he doesn't do anything else. But when you see him even on a basketball court, he has a good feel of like how things are moving around him. And especially now in the modern scheme in terms of the blocking, you've got to have a good feel about where people are coming and going and who you even have on your team next to you to help block. And I feel like playing the multiple sports can make a huge difference for that. The one thing about him that concerns me is that the Shiano staffs have not had good success with these like taller
Hmm.
guys, like especially at tackle. They usually their success at tackle is just physically gifted guys that they can get better at football, not the reverse. Like I feel like the strength and conditioning program here is amazing at the Robert Longerbeam type, like the smaller guys who you have to keep trim and don't let him put on too much weight. And on offensive line, this is going to be an interesting one with him. I think, for example, Ray Andrews, like
Yep.
he is the mold of guy they've had success with, where he's just a mauler. He doesn't have a lot of football experience, but he is just blows people up. Like when you watch his film from high school, this guy's only been playing for like 2 years football, right? And
Hmm.
it kind of looks like Michael Orr film from like back in the day.
Hmm.
And so he just destroys people. And the competition at his exact school might not be the best in the Miami area, but it's still pretty good. So between him and then Jones, who's Kenny Jones, I think
Delran.
he's a little bit stiff in his movements. But again, that's the type of guy that this staff has shown the ability to develop. Now, do they need to evolve? Maybe. Is Kadal have a path to playing time because of like I think he has pretty good upside. Maybe they haven't had guys like him, but in terms of that build, they haven't had as much success, and that's where I'm hoping that that can improve. But the fact that they got 3 offensive linemen, I think, is good enough because between freshmen and redshirt freshmen, there's plenty of guys in the pipeline right now. You really are probably only going to be able to get and keep maybe 3 guys per class because if there's too many stacked up, then they might just be expecting you're going to bring in transfer portal guys and move on. So I'm okay. I think it's more than adequate what they did or what could be expected of an offensive line class in this group. But of the 3, I'd say I'm the highest on Andrews based on what this staff has been able to do, with linemen in the past.
Yeah, he fits the style, and you kind of called it before the season, just in terms of how you thought the offense was going to go with Shiraka and Pat Flaherty, and that really was what made. I think that was kind of the key. What made them better this year is that they were the aggressor at times, and they were able to be more physical, where in the past they weren't. So I think he fits in there really well. The one counter to the height argument is, Holland Pierce, but I think that you're right in terms of why he has developed in more of his lack of football experience and have been able to develop him in strength training and all that. So he's a little bit of an outlier there, but I think he fits more of the mold you were talking about in terms of why they've been successful. But I think it's going to be interesting to see, because even you go back 2 years ago, I mean, we're talking about 2022 class in the high rankings, will Jacob Allen develop? That year that they brought in all those offensive linemen that have kind of been kept under wraps, who emerges ultimately. You have some guys coming back next year. But yeah,
Right.
it's really intriguing how Shiano's talked about needing this class to kind of complete the cycle of turning over the roster in full, having all his guys in. How are they going to develop and sprout up after this next coming year? Excited about all the roster retention, but it is really going to be a very big unknown going into 25 with so many young guys from these recruiting classes, including this current one, in terms of what kind of impact they could make.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of like turning over and having your type of guys, I think nothing symbolizes that more than the defensive linemen.
Hmm.
And the Lumen twins, when I was still living in Miami, I had mentioned this to you. I'm like, I want to try to go see these guys. And it didn't end up working out. I think it's because they end up changing schools
They
as
did.
like, they didn't stay at the same school. So there
Yep.
might have been some like I don't know if the AD because that's why I thought maybe they're changing. I don't know. So it ended up not working out. But from the very beginning, I saw these guys and I was like, this is exactly the type of guy that Shiano's staff does well with, right? Which is a defensive lineman, you're not quite sure is he going to play a 5 tech, a 3 tech, or where, but just getting guys that have that explosive ability. And between the 2 brothers, I thought Ty Clean was better. Then I thought Ty Cool Hill was better. And now I'm kind of back on the Ty Clean train, even though I think Ty Cool Hill has a higher rating. But I thought what I saw from Ty Clean this year was very, very good. And again, I'm not sure what position these guys are going to end up being. Like they might not be big enough to play edge, or they might not need to play edge because someone like Elijah King is going to be a solid pass rusher there. But
Hmm.
if you have disruptive athletic guys on your defensive line, even if they're undersized, but you have enough of them, you can rotate them in and out. And the fact that
Hmm.
they got both these guys who are getting a lot of interest from SEC schools is very impressive. I think this is when we talk pipeline. Rutgers has proven an ability to develop Canadian players, especially at defensive line. And so that had to be a huge selling point for them with the success that they've seen Rutgers have in the past and present at that position. And then, but really, possibly the biggest wild card of the whole class is Bethea, the defensive tackle,
Yep.
because the 2 biggest things you look at in any class, well, it used to be 3. It used to be quarterback, defensive speed, like especially corners and defensive tackle. Well, quarterback, that's a separate discussion we'll get to in a second. But between corner, which we already talked about, now defensive tackle, like, do you have enough beef up front? Because you never know. None of these guys are going to play starting defensive tackle as a freshman. Even Darius Hamilton was like kind of at the bottom end of a rotation as a freshman, and he was the most prepared true freshman defensive lineman we've ever seen at Rutgers. Well, maybe since like, Nate Turan or something. But I mean, is he going to be able to play a 1 tech? Like, or are they always going to have to just go to the portal and get these more developed physical guys that come in and fill in that middle of the defensive line? And I think it's, yeah, you might be able to get one a year, but you don't want to make a habit of it and then discourage guys from either developing and sticking around. You want to have at least a pipeline of guys who can play in your two deep. And but I do see the reason that you might be more willing to go more transfer portal route. We saw Isaiah Iton, Funny Maja. I mean, even thinking in the NFL, like Snacks Harrison, right? He played a very low level of college football, but then was a run stuffer for the Jets and Giants, as a pro. No one recruited that guy, out of high school. And so, yeah, I think you might be able to find guys and see maybe they develop at age 20 or 21, but you need somebody to be filling the ranks that can be playing, especially on the 3 tech. And hopefully Bethia can do that, as well as continuing to keep the pipeline going from the state of New York, particularly Erasmus Hall. But how do you feel? Do you feel like they needed to do more on the defensive, especially interior line?
Well, I feel like you can never do enough because I
Right.
think that,
Right.
to really be effective, and we saw it again this year where we had more hope that it wouldn't happen. But, I think they did get worn down in November, and, they didn't have those 8 to 10 guys that they could rely on where there wasn't drop off. And you're right. It was an excellent point. They've done very well, a credit to them in terms of the portal with the interior alignment of late. Obviously with Hanatu, E10, if
Even
my
Dwum for the first year.
yeah, that's right,
He's still
Dwumfor,
in
and
the
then
NFL.
Ifani Mahia. I probably butchered his name. I always do that. But anyway, they've done actually really well in the portal interior wise. But you're right. To your point, you have to start developing guys there as well. So I don't think you can ever have enough. You're also going to lose a lot of guys on the edge the following year with Lewis and Bailey. Specifically. So I think that they definitely need. It's very clear that they prioritize the defensive line from the outset.
Right.
Because there was at one point I think they were only like halfway through the class, and it was I think they already had 3 or 4 linemen pretty early on.
Yeah.
And I think that they really dipped into Florida there too for that position. So it's yeah, definitely I think a point of you have to have you have to have depth and talent on the offensive and defensive lines, and you can't just rely on the portal for that. So I think that did they have as much success as they wanted to have? Probably not, but I think they did a rather good job, and it was obvious that they prioritized it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of brings me to bring into thinking about guys who are kind of like tweeners. Well, the last one who's kind of more on the defensive line, but falls into the traditional like edge would be Elijah King. And I think
Mhm.
Elijah King might end up being the best guy in this entire class. I would say he's the most underrated, other than maybe Ben Black preseason. I mean, King is, again, the exact type of guy that this Rutgers staff has been able to do well with. Like when I see him, I'm like, this is kind of like what George Johnson looked like before he ended up at Rutgers. And that's a guy who went on to a very long NFL career where they just are able to mold these like bigger, longer guys. And King shows a good burst, but he's not even that fast off the snap. It kind of reminds me of Wesley Bailey in that like clearly he's not been playing football his entire life, or it's a combination of that and the fact that like growing into his, if he's really 6'6". But King is the type of guy where you either have to find 2 guys to play defensive end that can generate pressure, or do what you were saying before, which is you find your next versatile guy in like a Toure who just
Mhm.
can be everywhere. It needs to be one or the other. So the fact that they're going to this well and they might have a possibility of either one coming out of it is pretty good. I mean, I think King offers a lot there. I mean, the other guys are kind of following that what I would call tweener group, where are Shaw from Noah Shaw from Asheville. I mean, Asheville's kind of an interesting place. North Carolina has pretty good high school football, but Asheville is starting to get a little bit out there, and so I'm not sure on the competition. I think he played really well. When I watch him, he kind of reminds me of TJ Taylor, who I thought was going to be a superstar at Rutgers, but ended up being hurt and then became a linebacker and like not really as good. So I have to temper expectations a little bit with Shaw, but like he's just good. I mean, I didn't include him with the linebacker group because the hope would be that he's more of a coverage type guy. And then uh, uh, Aguni, I want to say it's Aguni, but I think it's Agunya. Like, I'm not sure if he's a receiver or tight end, kind of like Crumpler. he might slip through the cracks. He's the type of guy who, in a group of 5 team, or like he would just tear it up in the FCS. But it all depends on like, is he fast enough to play in the Big Ten? And then of course the last one in that group is Winovich, and it's not because I don't think he's good, but there's really one question: is he Brian Leonard 2.0 or not? Because if he is, that brings a level to your running back room that's just insanely impressive. If he's not, then is he kind of like a fullback? Does he play linebacker? Like, I think he offers a lot to your team, but
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily move the needle of like raising the floor of the program. But if you're anything close to Brian Leonard as a ball carrier, receiver, and just overall offensive weapon, like that does raise the ceiling of this team. And so that's really what I want to see from him. But I mean, yeah, when it all said and done, like he could be that good, and he for a while was the highest rated player in the class, even before he moved to New Jersey. So I mean, Winovich is a big, like I think he has a high floor, but really what I'm hoping is that he brings raises the ceiling of the team. Any
Yeah,
other thoughts on that?
I actually even think it would be curious if he even he's not particularly tall, but could he end up developing as a tight end too? I feel like he's got good ball
Right,
skills.
could be an H back.
Yeah, they could certainly use him in, I think, a versatile way. So, and it'd be interesting to see how quickly he's able. Obviously, the running back room, with Monungai and right now Brown, there's not a ton of opportunity there, but it'd be interesting to see how they develop him. And then I wanted to ask also, just in terms of your thoughts on, this 24 class wasn't particularly strong in New Jersey. Rutgers really did a good job, I think, of establishing some new footprints. North Carolina with Dave Brock as an assistant, they're tapping more into Big Ten footprint. They're also obviously Florida was a big resource for them. I think we both agree that not being so tri-state area, New Jersey dependent in recruiting is a good thing. But do you think that this is more of a one-off because of the class itself, or do you think this is more of a kind of shift in long-term strategy for Shiano?
I think it's more temporary because what I think will happen is twofold. One, if the program continues to just be solid, you're going to get more old school state of Rutgers type guys, Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York City, even Delaware, pulling into Maryland a little bit. You're going to get more. And then second, the thing is, like when you have these relationships as a coach, in the pipeline, it's hard to maintain them. Like obviously, this Canadian thing is not just guys from a particular school or particular province even, but when it comes to like Coach Brock's relationships in North Carolina or even Shiana's connections when he was down in Florida, like it's hard to maintain those for an extended period of time once
Yeah,
you're staying at Rutgers. So I think longer term, eventually it kind of wears out. Maybe eventually the coaches, they retire or they go coach somewhere else, and it doesn't go away right away, but it's really hard to maintain those long distance. And so I think this is more of a short term thing. If I had to guess, I do think though that the ties to the Big Ten can't be understated because this Midwest, this awareness of Rutgers is huge. The fact that you're getting guys from Michigan, Wisconsin, especially. But then the Benjamin Black thing is just super interesting to me because, and the reason I like to use him as an example, he's the only one I've seen since Rutgers had Taekwon Underwood that reminded me of him at all. Like when I would do the comparisons of like where's this guy's floor or his most likely or his ceiling, like he is the only one I've seen that looks like Taekwon Underwood because he has this ability to absorb contact and stay balanced, but he also has that straight line speed to just run away from people. Like it's a little different than a Janarian Grant who is kind of shifty and like but he rarely just caught a pass over the middle and took it to the house. Whereas like Taekwon Underwood could just catch it in stride and go all the way. Or he could just catch it and turn the corner. Kind of like, and Benjamin Brack brings that. So why do I mention this? Because the ACC teams in North Carolina were all over this guy. I
mm-hmm.
know that because I live here now. And so the fact that, when these ACC schools are coming calling, but you are preferring to go to Rutgers, and I don't know how much NIL had to do with this, but I don't think it's that important, is that you are still saying, okay, I know the Big Ten is going to have a seat at the table. Like That is a huge thing. And then same thing with, like, for example, Sam Robinson, the linebacker. Like, he could have gone to the ACC easily. He could have gone to USF. Like, I think that was, he might have even been previously committed to there, which is now, I think, in the Big 12. But, like, they know that you got to go to the Big 10 or the SEC. Like, that's where the action is. So unless you get like maybe a sweetheart NIL deal, or you really see a path to immediate playing time, coming to a school like Rutgers is the right way to go. And I think that other players are going to start seeing that, especially in the tri-state area, as well as, Eastern Pennsylvania and even down to the DMV. That's going to end up helping, long term. So I know that was a little bit more of an answer to your question, but I wanted to give some examples as to why I feel that this is more temporary.
No, it's a great point, and I think that if it is temporary, they're in a position of strength, right? Because they've
Right.
established some new areas, they've made some new contacts. They're winning battles, not just against I think a lot of fans are still stuck in the Big East mode of we got to be Pitt, we got to be BC, we got to beat Syracuse, in recruiting battles where it's much bigger now. Where it's I mean they're going into Georgia. I mean getting Antonio White, who did have SEC
Yeah.
offers. He had ACC offers. And getting guys like that, and even like for me, to today's win, right, with Nagago beating Michigan State with a new staff, with a lot of momentum right now. They've been killing it on the recruiting trail, and Rutgers was able to win that battle. Like that's much more impactful to me than how they're doing against Boston College or Pitt. And I think that fans need to look at it that way. And I think that's where the versatility of the recruiting, if they can be in a position of strength in New Jersey, where they are starting to get, 3, 4, 5 of the top 15 guys year after year in the state, but then still able to go get, a super athletic kid out of North Carolina, or make an impact in Ohio and Wisconsin the way they're doing, and keeping Florida, this year, like they got a lot of guys in Florida, but they also got a couple higher rated guys in Florida than they've gotten in a long time, or at
Right.
least in recent memory. So I think those are the kind of baby steps you're seeing also, where it's just going to make the recruiting as a whole, I think, more dynamic, and in a position of strength as Shiano continues to build momentum here.
Yeah. I mean, Ganongo, we didn't even talk about him. I mean, yeah, you can say
Forgot
like
him on the defensive
he was
line.
committed to Kent State, but this guy's a monster. Like, kind of like you saw Abdul Rahman last year, kind of late, just show up out of nowhere, and then was one of the higher rated guys. Again, a Canadian defensive lineman, kind of come out of nowhere. We've seen that what they've done with Conga. Again, kind of became a higher prospect late in the cycle. Like, this guy could be awesome. And it's the same type of thing as the Lumen brothers. I don't know where he's going to play on the defensive line, but you just got to keep adding those type of guys. Back to White, I mean, I think Kai Sanders is the best player right now. But who do I think is going to be the best player 1 year from now? I would say it's either going to be Duff or Antonio White. I mean, White is the highest rated right now on 247 Composite. And like where he's from in Lilburn, I used to live very close to there in Georgia. And that is good football. Like, that's really good football. I mean, Rayola, the number one quarterback prospect, who is basically just like within 20 minutes from, like, that's the quality of football that they're playing down there. And so the fact that he was rated so high, and then I'll also give high praise to him because he is the closest I've seen Rutgers recruit to Mohamed Sanu in terms of like, this guy is big and fluid. And I even had to go back and look at some Sanu film yesterday just to be like, am I really sizing this up correctly? But in terms of how big and smooth he is, that's really the closest that I think Rutgers has come. Now, remember, Mohamed Sanu, like, the reason I say 1 year from now is Sanu didn't play high school football as a senior because he was too old. So he was really 19, 20 years old. So that's why I don't know if White is that now, but it's entirely possible in 1 year that he is like, running the wild knight or just being like a hybrid Swiss Army knife offensive or defensive weapon all over the place. Like, I think he could play safety right away, but like you kind of talked about a receiver, I guess the one positive of not being stocked at receiver is you have all these opportunities for guys to emerge that might be pegged to play other positions elsewhere. Like Ian Strong should have been playing linebacker, but because Rutgers had a need there, he played and was good. At any other program, he's probably not a receiver except maybe Iowa. So
Right.
I think that there's opportunity there. And White, if you can show that you can develop that kind of guy, those pipelines are going to grow, or at least the coaches in that area will field your call. They'll be like, oh, I remember that Antonio White, and he went on to be, an all Big Ten guy or whatever for you. Like, that goes a long way in just getting that initial phone call that may open doors for them. So, I mean, I think we ended up talking about almost everybody. But the last thing I just wanted to mention is just like retaining talent is going underneath the radar here. And the fact that they've been able to keep so many guys means these guys should not have to play unless they're ready. And then if they're ready and they can step into the lineup, that just, advances where the program is. I think that it's the name of the game now is stability. Stability, stability, stability. As conferences are changing, coaches are changing. If you can stay the course, especially with your coordinators, and continue to produce talent, like that's what Rutgers has to do. And then a year here and there, you might end up with like a 9-3 season if the schedule breaks right, if health breaks right, and if you have the quarterback. And I think that because their base is pretty good, we might be able to see what AJ Surace can do. And we didn't even get to talk too much about him, but
Well,
I
that's how I
mean,
wanted to end it. So go from there.
yeah, I mean, the question with him is he big and strong enough to play? Because from an information processing standpoint, like you had his quarterbacks coach on the other day, there's a reason he's the number 1 or 2 best quarterback in the state of New Jersey. Rutgers has not had that very often. Maybe Jonathan Lewis, I guess. Art Sikowski sort of. That was kind of a weird situation because he was playing down at IMG. But I don't want Surace to have to play next year. But Kirk Soraka is not shy about playing true freshman or redshirt freshman if he thinks they're grasping the system. If he doesn't, then he's definitely not going to play them. He's going to go with the guy with the physical upside like we've seen in the past. But he played Chase Dodd over Tom Savage during a kind of bizarre year, but he did play him. And then, at Minnesota, he played true freshman a few times. Not probably because he wanted to, but if the guy can pick up the scheme, he'll play. And I'm not saying Surace will or should play next year, but I feel really, really good that 2 years from now, he's probably going to be the starter. And take that for what you will between who they have or who they might bring in even as a transfer. But as long as his arm is strong enough and he doesn't get injured, I think he has the ability to read defenses and the ability to have some pocket presence that you need in the Soraka offense to be what it needs to be. Like you saw Tanner Morgan, not the most physically gifted guy, but led their team to the best record Minnesota's had since 1960. Like that's the type of guy Soraka can work with. And I think AJ Surace brings all of that. And so I'm really happy that they got him.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I feel it's almost encapsulates kind of the for me the biggest takeaway of this class is that with all that roster retention you got, bringing in this class, you brought in more athletes, you brought in more talent, the floor goes up, and a big key that we've seen Rutgers have such an issue over the years is guys being thrust into roles too early in their development and not being able to fully develop as players, as prospects. And as you said, none of these guys are going to have to play next year. It's just going to be a bonus if any of them are ready, and even if it's on special teams. And I think that for the program to take that next step, stability, like you said, is so important. And having that balance, I think Rutgers has done a great job in terms of being realistic in the portal, being able to plug in guys that there, but aren't so reliant on everything and are building that development in those key areas along the lines at the skill positions. And this class just reinforces that. And I think this class has a real opportunity. You talked about a lot of guys that could be lottery tickets. But I think the reason for that, not just the talent that's coming in, but the situation they're coming into.
Exactly.
It's such a more staple program now than even 2 years ago, where, we may look back at that 22 class and, unfortunately, it might not end up working out that great based on the ranking, but they came into a much more difficult situation where these guys are, I think, primed with the stability of the coaching staff, the stability of the roster, and just how they're developing the guys above this class. I think it's a really ideal situation where you could see, 10, 12 guys blossom into big time contributors down the road.
Yeah. And I'm just looking back at the list, and like the only guy I think we didn't mention, but I mentioned in a previous podcast, was like a Monty Keener, right? Mm-hmm. This guy, and the reason I want to use him as an illustration is because I think there's 2 ways you go once you have this level of stability. You either go the air raid route and you're like, all right, this is how we're going to handle it. Or you go the way that they're doing, which is more of like the Iowa route. Like, we're going to bring in a zillion tight ends, and not all of them are going to be that good, but we need two of them to be good that they can both block and receive. And so it's like, I'm not sure which of those guys is going to be in this class, but you're kind of just filling that pipeline. And if you want to look at it as like these individual ones, like they have the floor there. As long as this team does not regress, particularly on offense, and then yeah, they're bringing a lot of guys back on defense, but like I talked about, there are opportunities for more snaps at all three levels, which if there's not, then you might have guys entering the transfer portal, or even especially now, if you're a true freshman and you're like, hey, there's three guys in the linebacker room or whatever in front of me that are all sophomores, and the staff was going to just play them. Like, then I might not commit here. As long as you're seeing the things coming out the end of that, the pipeline, there's going to be guys who are willing to jump into that. And so I think that overall, like defense, yeah, maybe they could have got a little more speed or a few more guys up front. But offense, like, they're setting themselves up to have a lot more tools in the toolbox to be a better offense, even if it's not next year, but it's 2 or 3 years down the road.
Completely agree. Definitely progress both on the field in 2023 and on the recruiting trail in 2024. I think set up both for a really important, crucial, but exciting time next year, both on the field and in recruiting. We'll have plenty more. We'll be back together soon to preview the bowl game against Miami and the Pinstripe Bowl on the 28th. And thank you so much for all your insight. Early signing period. We always look for, we go back years on this. And this is the first time we've done a podcast on it. We used to pre-write like 30 articles leading up to this. But
sometimes guys would sign or they would flip. And because especially during the Ash era, we had no idea. Like, we're just like hoping that this guy signs. But then once in a while you get a nugget like, Aaron Young last minute. Like, that was really cool. Like, flipping him. But yeah, I mean, they were asking me about like how much did I used to work on sign day. I'm like, I would pull 2 all-nighters right going into it. And then I text you at like 4 a.m. like, I'm going to bed. I'll be up at 8 or whatever it was. So
yeah, and then I'd be at the computer from like 6 a.m. to noon, just nonstop, having like 3 posts ready and just click, 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 just like a robot, waiting, refreshing Twitter, waiting for the official to come in. So
in 2019, I took off my regular job that week. I mean, that's how crazy it was.
Well, enough of reminiscing. Thanks everyone for listening and watching once again. We'll be back soon, and definitely successful early signing period so far. I don't think any surprises are coming. You got the one signing day flip. You retained your class. I think all in all, a step forward. We all hope recruiting continues to improve, but I think that again, this also adds to the stability of the program long term, and exciting to see what will come from it. Thanks so much for listening and watching here once again at the Scarlet Faithful.